Shalom family, and welcome back again to another episode of Akoti Speaks. Let's talk Black Thoughts and Reflection. I am Akoti Tamor, and on behalf of News, Facts, and Comments, I say welcome, shalom, assalamu alaikum, and hotel. Family, I have some information to share with you all. And for some of you all, this information will not be new. And for others, it may be new. At any rate, I would like for you to take this information, meditate on this information, and if you deem it worthy, share with other individuals of like mind, and then act. Do something towards this topic. So, let me just start by saying I was contemplating doing a article for News, Facts, and Comments on the plight of people that were, for lack of better words, or to just put things into context, people who are now prisoners of a foreign war. And I am talking about those individuals that has the same skin tone as I do. Political prisoners of an ethnic war. Now that term ethnic war has not been used in recent decades to describe the plight of those that were taken from the continent of Africa, Europe, Portugal, Spain, and dispersed throughout the four corners of the earth as so-called slaves. During the course of my study, trying to find who I am historically, where my people come from, the culture, the language. What was it like for our people, my people, before colonialism, before what they've coined as the transatlantic slave trade? And in the course of my studies, I came across a lot of information that, like I said, to some may find unbelievable, or for some have never put things into this perspective as I'm going to present to you today. So, you all know that I've been doing interviews with individuals who are YouTube influencers, who are activists in the community. And I did an interview with Haki Shakur. He's a young brother that is full of a wealth of knowledge. And I wanted to get his perspective on those thoughts that I was having regarding the information that I encountered regarding who we are and how we got to this position as being prisoners of a ethnic war. And so I'm going to start off by giving you all a brief recap of the conversation, or part of the conversation that Haki and I had. And from this moment, going back to that conversation, everything that I've put into perspective from the information that I've gathered is confirming that my intuition was correct in regards to how do we gain reparations? How do we put those who are responsible for enslaving a group of people for hundreds of years, how do we make them pay back? And so, like I said, I'm going to go ahead and start with this interview that I did with Haki Shakur, and this is going to set the framework for the rest of this brief. Hopefully brief, I can get through the information in quick speed time, but I want you all to gather this information and reflect on it. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started.
So you mentioned bringing the Black August outside of prison walls. So and from your understanding, would you say, or would you agree that we of the diaspora and Aboriginals are all still political prisoners of war?
Yes, I'm in totally agreement that we are still political prisoners and prisoners of war, because we got to put this in the proper political context, because so many people are diseducated about our struggle and our conditions now, and who we are and what we are pertaining to our status as a human being and our status as a people. So I always like to put it in a proper political context that yes, we are still political prisoners and prisoners of war, because the proper context is this. People got to understand that the transatlantic slave trade, was actually a war. Now, the reason why we say that it's a war is that if you look at it from a historical context, historical materialism, dialectic materialism, and telling our story, that what happened to our ancestors on the African continent, this is a war. When you take nations, so many European nations, and we can take it even to the carving up of Africa, the colonialistic period of time, the colonialism, when they split Africa up into different territories amongst African nations. The most significant part of it, of that colonization and that colonialism, was the transatlantic slave trade. These are nations that went into Africa, kidnapped people, murdered people, enslaved people, and took them to a whole nother part of this world, to the Western Hemisphere. Enslavement is an act of war. This is the thing with black people. A lot of black people don't want to talk about this because it's uncomfortable. They don't like to have the uncomfortable conversation about slavery and what slavery actually was. And slavery is an act of war. And that scares off a lot of new African black people. That scares off a lot of African people and black people, period, when we start talking about war. Because we know war consists of death, incarceration, murder, genocide. This genocide continues on us today. You see what I'm saying? So what I'm saying basically about political prisoners and prisoners of war is that we are a people, a nation of people, whatever you want to call yourself, because we get lost in the context of titles. Whatever you name yourself, that's your human right. You know what I'm saying? Because we know in the Human Rights Charter, in the Human Rights Period, that you can name yourself whatever you want to name yourself. But we got to also remember to put in the proper context of what happened to our people and what's continuing to happen to our people. That we are political prisoners and we are prisoners of war. Your ancestors were political prisoners and prisoners of war. Being enslaved is an act of war. So that makes you political prisoners and prisoners of war.
So that was Haki's take on it, and he said so much in that short period of time. To unpack that, I listened to what he said several times, and he confirmed a lot of my thoughts going into that interview. And because of that, I was propelled to go even further. Now, 2 weeks ago, I received a notice that we, as a nation of people, are getting together to come together for what we now know as the National Reparations Convention. Okay, now this event is going to take place this weekend, Saturday, October 7th through Sunday, October 8th. 50 national reparation groups and leaders confirmed. All reparation advocates are welcome. Now, here's the thing. You got 50 national reparation groups. Why aren't they all one group? Why isn't it just one organization that's spearheading this whole thing, right? And that goes to what I wrote about in the article for News, Facts, and Comments. It was published today, and we're going to get to that article in just a second. But understand this. We have 50 national reparation groups that are all calling for reparations. And they're going to ascend on Georgia State University in Atlanta on this weekend, Saturday and Sunday. Now, I wrote an article, and I'm going to go ahead and pull that article up so that we all can see the context and where I'm going with this. Oh, where did I put it? Here we go. Okay, so this article I wrote, and I'm not going to read the whole article because I'm going to give you an opportunity to go ahead and delve into it. Go to newsfactsnc.net to read the entire article. But I titled it, Right of Self-Determination, the Avenue to Reparations, Prisoners of Ethnic War. Now, in this article, I explained how the Pope in 1952 authorized what we would call Catholic sailors, Catholic adventurers, Catholic discoverers to go out and conquer and enslave those individuals who they deemed were pagan or non-Christian, and thus the transatlantic slave trade as we all know it, right? They started in Spain and Portugal, moving individuals there to areas of west coast of Africa that they had already colonized. And then they took people from the west coast of Africa and brought them to the Americas. Transatlantic slave trade, right? So I want to read this part of my article particularly. And I say here, throughout history, prisoners of war were not afforded civil rights as they were deemed chattel, property belonging to the possessor. However, according to the Creator of all things, in the United Nations, humans have the right to self-determination, allowing people to freely determine their political status, pursue their economic, social, and cultural development. The descendants of slaves, prisoners of war, must frame their legal argument in a way that speaks to the origin of the harm. A war was declared, and a victor decided, and those that were injured because of the war must be compensated. Many heads of states presented apologies for the ethnic war, but have failed to compensate those affected. The concept of compensation is not foreign to these heads of states, as these states have given reparations to the Japanese nation and the Israeli nation and others. So, with that being said, family, are our brothers and sisters who are participating in this national convention, will they stand up and declare themselves to be prisoners of war? Will they stand up and declare that they are prisoners of war? Because that's what's gonna be needed in order to, number one, perform or submit a lawsuit to the International Court of Human Rights in order to have standing in their court. We have to frame the legal argument in such a way that it speaks to the harm. If we say that we're descendants of slaves, then where is the harm that we can actually pinpoint today? Our ancestors were enslaved. We were not. I'm talking about those who are alive today. Thus, there's no standing on that grounds to receive reparations. And I'm talking from what I believe is the legal standpoint of the whole reparations debate. Typically, reparations are given when there is as a result of a war. That's when reparations are given. They did it with the Japanese, and for some reason, the United States pays the Israeli nation reparations, even though we went in on their side when we fought against Germany and its allies during World War II. So why we're paying the Israeli nation, it just baffles me. But in the case of the Japanese, we did irreparable harm on their country, as well as enslaved or encamped those Japanese citizens who were residing in the United States. They rounded them up and put them in internment camps. And when the war was over, the victor declared the United States paid Japan reparations for the harm they had done over there in Japan, as well as to the citizens that they had residing here in America. So if we go into this whole reparations debate stating that we are prisoners of war, then perhaps we might be able to garner the attention of the whole world. Because in fact, we were prisoners of war. And if you continue to read in my article, you'll see where I notate that this was an ethnic war. Why ethnic war? Because what the colonialists did, the possessors, what they did was take individuals from their own land, robbing them of their culture, their language, their religion, their way of life. We have no ethnic background that we could point to. That is why they continue to come up with these labels for us, i.e., Indians. That's what Christopher Columbus labeled our ancestors when, upon first coming into the lands of the Caribbean and the Americas, because he thought that he had landed in the Indies. And typically you name people behind the landmass where they're situated on. Thus Indians. Then when the transatlantic slave trade began to happen, they went over to Africa and started taking individuals from what we know now as the Igbo tribe. By the time they made it to the Americas, because of the change in of the dialect between the Europeans and the Africans, they pronounced Igbo as Igbo. And there's several historical documents archived probably in these famous universities, Harvard, Oxford. You know, if you go and do a deep dive on that, even maybe the Library of Congress may have some of these documents whereby the slave traders were setting up auction blocks and presented to individuals looking to buy slaves. They presented them a document where it clearly says Igbos for sale. So we went from those of us taken from that area, West Africa, they were Igbos over there in Africa, but when they got to America, the Caribbeans, they were labeled Igbos. And from Igbos, we went to nigger, called niggers. Now, some may argue that, hey, that's because they went and got some slaves from up and down the Niger River. And because of the mistranslation or the different dialects, by the time they made it to the Americas and the Caribbeans, they were called nigger because they were taken from the Niger River. So then we went from nigger to Negro after the abolishment of slavery. They labeled us Negro. Then after Negro, during the Jim Crow era, the black codes, we went to being colored. Then after the Civil Rights Movement, Afro-American was introduced. Then after Jesse Jackson, I believe it was Jesse Jackson or whomever, had this bright idea that we're no longer Afro-American, we're just black, a color. So that's like being colored, black, right? And then now fast forward to today, we're labeled African American, Jamaicans, Haitians, Puerto Ricans. All these labels that were given to us, placed on us by the oppressor. So, who are we? Determining who we are determines your standing. Commonality between ADOs, Black First, B1, and foundational Black Americans is that we're all prisoners of war. Well, you may say, I'm not locked up, I'm not in chains, I'm free. No, you're not. Because you were never given, your ancestors, your parents, your grandparents were never given an opportunity to decide if they wanted to be governed by these United States of America. The UN Charter states, as my brother Haki alluded to, states that you have a right to be self-determined. You have a right to decide your culture, your language, your way of life, your well-being, how you're going to be governed and who you're going to be governed by. You are political prisoners because you were never afforded that. You were never given the right to self-determine. So that is the legal framework in which our brothers and sisters should definitely go into these meetings, this convention, with that in mind, I pray that that is on the table. Because if we keep sounding the horn and claiming to be descendants of slaves, it's like insanity. You keep doing the same thing over and over and over again and expect a different result. So I don't want to be the only one speaking on this. See, this self-determination, or right to self-determination, is not a new concept. It's been a position that many of our ancestors took, including Malcolm X, including Dr. Martin Luther King, and including Farrakhan at one time, and including Elijah Muhammad, Marcus Garvey, that we have a right to self-determine how we want to live, where we want to live. That is reparations, to allow individuals to determine. It's not always money. It's not always land. But it is the acknowledgement that you have that right to form a nation because you're political prisoners, spoils of the ethnic war. And so let me share a couple of videos with you so that you can get a better understanding of what I'm trying to say and understand how I came to this conclusion. Like I said, it's not a new concept. It's an old concept repackaged into different groups like ADOs, FBA, and Black First. But what they're all missing is that we're all prisoners of war, not just descendants of slaves. So let me go ahead and start this article. This video here. And I want to say fair use. This is my commentary on this article, but this organization, Balanta.org, is a very, very powerful organization. They have some very good information regarding our history and the right to self-determination and plebiscite voting. All of those things are intrinsically intertwined.
Amari Obadeli is the primary architect of the plebiscite movement for Afro-descendants in the United States. I have prepared a free collection of his works on this issue at www.balanta.org/plebiscite. Please distribute widely. Okay. The purpose of a plebiscite for Afro-descendants in the United States was at the time of emancipation, and still is, to allow every victim of the crime of trafficking from Africa and enslavement in America a chance to exercise his or her unalienable right to liberty by choosing among and receiving the remedy of one of the four options: U.S. citizenship, return to Africa, emigration to another country, and the creation of a new African nation on American soil. In the context of the Emancipation Proclamation, the 13th and 14th Amendments, a plebiscite was the procedural step necessary to enable and empower the newly freed men to exercise their freedom to determine their destiny.
So again, I hope that our brothers and sisters that are participating in this National Reparations Convention have ready to go paperwork for a plebiscite vote. While you have all those individuals there located in one area, 50 different reparation organizations cast a vote and have it an ongoing vote that once you get those signatures from those individuals there, then you can distribute that petition to have others sign that vote. Now he's going to explain what a plebiscite vote is for those of us who do not know.
A plebiscite is no mere survey. A plebiscite is a popular vote on a proposal which includes the entire populace. Voters are asked to either reject or accept the proposal, with the outcome of the plebiscite determining the fate of the proposed measure, action, constitution, or other political proposal. A plebiscite should not be confused with a general election or regular voting, as no party candidates are included in it. The word comes from the Latin plebis, meaning the people, and citum, or decree. Under a plebiscite, the people are allowed to decide on an issue of importance, and the outcome of the vote is like a decree from the citizens. Both democracies and dictatorships use plebiscites, although for very different purposes. In both instances, the vote cannot truly be called a plebiscite unless all eligible voters are able to participate. Now, in the words of Omari Obadeli, we begin with a petition drive, for the key to our legitimacy is consent, the will of the people. The petition simply asserts that the undersigned citizens agree to hold an election with UN participation to determine whether or not we shall be independent of the jurisdiction of the United States. I'd like to emphasize here that independent of the jurisdiction of the United States could come through emigration, repatriation to America, or establishing a new African state.
Very important that he mentioned that, establishing a new African state, and that goes in line with our brothers and sisters that or I guess you can say align themselves with being foundational Black Americans or indigenous, right? I hear all the time that we should align ourselves with American soil because we were taken from these. We were enslaved on these lands here before Christopher Columbus ever came. We're indigenous, so that aligns with those who, relate themselves to being Aboriginals, foundational Black Americans, American descendants of slaves. So that can be an option, but it has to be put to a vote, and all have to agree, right? You have to have a majority consensus that we do not want to be governed by the United States of America. That's the main takeaway from having a plebiscite vote, is removing consent to be under their jurisdiction and to be able to self-determine how we are to move forward and how we are to govern ourselves. Now, with that being said, I do want to go back to let you hear from another gentleman that I came across really quick. Let me get that up, because he basically said exactly what I wrote in my article, and it was just confirmation for me that, hey, my line of thinking is not that far off. These are some of the things that we have to or must look into. It's very important that we do those things and not hesitate with it. So let me get to that article. And I pray that these things are on the table for the people to consider at this National Reparations Convention taking place this weekend. So this is a radio show clip from Belanta that they placed up on their website, and I was simply blown away. By the way, please go to belanta.org. They have some very, very good information on who we are and what they stand for. But This is we're going to be listening to Sip Hiwi Balaka on WEFT 90.1 Higher Ground. So let's go ahead and take a listen to that, and I'm gonna fast forward it to the 25-minute mark, which is when the brother comes in and starts speaking. Let's see, I can't really get it 25 exact, so let's go ahead and pick it up here.
Champion swimmer, Illinois State champion swimmer by the age of 10. As one of the best swimmers in the country when I was graduating from Oswego High School. And that allowed me to go to Yale University, where I swam and was trying to become the first African American on the U.S. Olympic swim team. I didn't make it in 1992. I had missed qualifying for the Olympic trials by 0.8 of a second. Human rights, the International Court of Justice, and other forums, so that Black people in America.
We're going to back it up just a little bit. We didn't want to get all the history because, we don't have that much time. I don't want to spend up too much of your time because you can always go here and listen to it.
Champion swimmer, Illinois State champion swimmer by the age of.
Listen to it in its entirety, but I want to get to the main point.
We could use international law as well to pursue justice under an international framework. And Malcolm's goal was to bring the United States before the World Court, because the legal system would protect, the international legal system is supposed to protect our human rights and our rights under various international treaties. So he attempted to do that, and that was one of the main reasons why he was assassinated. In order to bring the United States before the international court, it required another nation that was a member of the United Nations to do that. And Malcolm had succeeded in getting Kenya, Burundi, and Tanzania to bring such a case. Well, he was assassinated. It never happened. Right after him, Brother Amari Obadeli, who was instrumental in founding the Republic of New Africa, which is a great history. And if you're not familiar with it, there's plenty of information on the internet. He had realized that at emancipation, there was a process that we should have went through that is supported in international law that allowed our ancestors, the newly emancipated, to choose our destiny, whether we wanted to return to Africa, whether we wanted to form an independent nation of our own, whether we wanted to integrate into the United States, or whether we wanted to go to some other country because we had family there, or we had other interests. And so I had learned all about this and how the Lincoln administration actually passed legislation to provide for all four of those options. And then the United States had a coup. Some rebels assassinated President Lincoln, and the very next day, they rescinded all the legislation which would have allowed our people to choose their political destiny. And then 2-3 years later, citizenship was imposed upon us without our consent. And so we went from being the chattel property of slave owners to being citizen properties of a foreign government. And when I had learned all about this, it was shocking to me. Why did I never learn this at Oswego Community High School? Why did I not learn about this at Yale University? Why is this the first time I'm hearing about it? And so the work that I'm doing now is using the newly created Permanent Forum of People of African Descent at the United Nations, which allows us to request advisory opinions on legal questions concerning African descendant people. And for the first time in history, we have a mechanism at the United Nations that allows us to start that international legal process with the International Court of Justice. So I've been heavily involved in leading that effort, as well as helping us to realize that One of the human rights violations is ethnocide. Ethnocide is the destruction of your ethnic identity. We didn't come here as African Americans. We didn't come to the United States as Black people. We didn't even come as Africans. We knew ourselves according to our ancestors. Balanta people, Jola people, Akan people, Uwe people, the various different tribes. Most African Americans right now, if you ask them, who do you come from in Africa? The vast majority of us, we can't answer that. That is the evidence of ethnocide, that your ancestral identity has been destroyed. That's a crime against humanity that has no statute of limitations. And so I'm involved now in the work of trying to bring state-sanctioned ethnocide cases, right, to international forums, the Inter-American Commission for Human Rights, the International Court of Justice, and other forums, so that Black people in America can benefit from scientific technology, which allows for DNA testing, so that you can identify where you come from in Africa. And you can, under the Geneva Convention, be returned or compensated or be given land grants in the United States because of this ethnocide. The United States doesn't like this term. You know, it's the cousin of genocide. It's a very serious term. And until now, nobody had been using it. So there's so much to talk about. Sometimes I get lost because I'm involved in so many different projects and efforts, but these are two of the issues that Representative Carol Ammons and I were able to address in that Illinois Resolution 292.
Okay, so there you have it. He just explained to you this is we are the descendants of ethnocide that took place during the ethnic war when the Pope gave the edict, the papal bull, and told his followers, his so-called Catholic Christians, to go out and conquer the world. And in doing so, they have managed to commit this ethnocide in the process of them declaring this ethnic war. A lot of Muslims have adopted the last name of X because they have no idea of their ethnicity. They don't know where they come from as far as, you know, where their ancestors were taken from. So they mark it as an X. X means unknown. They purposely denied us those ethnic rights so that we could remain subjugated and under their rule, even though they knew that humans have a right to determine how they want to live and where they want to live. And so we have never been properly compensated, of course, you know, and that is why they're having this National Reparations Convention. Again, I do pray that individuals such as himself is on the panel as a speaker. I'm looking here at a couple of people on this flyer for the same event. I don't see that brother's name on here. And I'm wondering if he even knows about this, or not if he knows, because I'm quite sure he knows. But I'm wondering if his organization was invited to appear. That's a question that that remains. We'll wait and see the results of this convention, who showed up and who did not. There's a lot of rumors going around as to why individuals have chosen not to come, including Minister Farrakhan. Not sure why he's not going to be in attendance, but we'll find out in the wash as usual. So, but I do want to go back to my article because I really do encourage all of you to take a look at that article, read that article, and disseminate it, because it has a lot of information that I think that we should constantly disseminate to our people, to remind them of the reasonings behind holding such gatherings. If we're going to all come together, we should not come together just for the point of fact of discussing what has transpired, but come together to put together a plan to move forward. So in my article, I posed a question, and I say here, the proper standing for those seeking reparations before the International Court of Human Rights is prisoners of war. Will the National Reparation Convention happening this weekend, October 6th to the 7th, establish this standing by starting a plebiscite vote, removing consent to be governed by the United States, and declare that they are exercising their right of self-determination? Will that happen at the National Reparations Convention? Many are awaiting the results of the gathering. Prisoners of war cannot afford another meeting with the outcome being and no real substantial solutions or plan of action at the end of the gathering. So that is the question I pose to the NRC, National Reparations Convention. Are you going to declare that we are prisoners of war? I think that is something, a term, a title that we all can agree that we are, once we understand the history of how things happen, and once you understand international human rights laws. A lot of people frown upon the brother Ramzu Yunus, who's been beating this drum for a very, very long time, and he's also been putting boots on the ground, establishing the Republic of Detroit, the Republic of Jackson. He's having a conference call on Friday, October 6th at 8 p.m. Eastern. You can go to his page on YouTube to find out all the details. But I am waiting for this brother to declare that we are prisoners of war, and that is the right way to obtain reparations through the UN. If we're going to make the UN abide by those charters and treaties that they sign, then we must have legal standing to go before them. After all, it is a court. And so you have to have the right legal standing, and you have to frame the legal argument in a way that you can be repaired. You can show that a harm has been committed, and that the person that committed the harm must be forced to repair that harm, and going to the UN with a plan and a proper framework and a proper legal standing as political prisoners will afford us a gateway to receiving reparations. Like I said, please go to my website, newsfactsnc.net, and read this article. It's a lot of information that I think that you would appreciate, and that will give you better understanding as to why individuals like Ramzu is pounding the drum in saying that we have a right to self-determine. We have a right to self-determination. Why individuals will have a better understanding as to why individuals such as Marcus Garvey and Haki Shakur is saying that we were political prisoners who were not afforded the right to self-determine once we were so-called set free. But we were set free to be left here for them to declare that you were so-called a minority citizen, because I don't think they ever really declared us to be American. And that's evident by all the different names that they put upon us, all the different titles that they gave us and that we accepted ignorantly. So, with that being said, family, just these are these things that we have to consider. We have to leave out these flawed titles that we're giving ourselves in this day. Afro descendants, also known as African descendants of slaves or American descendants of slaves. There were plenty of prisoners of war that were not in Africa when they were taken prisoner or enslaved. Indigenous American, it's another term that we label ourselves. It is well documented that many prisoners of the ethnic war were taken prisoner from places like Portugal, Spain, and Europe, and Africa. So not all of us are indigenous to America. And then we have the foundational Black American. That's another label that we recently come up with. And it's a label that is flawed on its face. Why? Because black is a color, number one, and it has no legal standing in a court of law. All prisoners of ethnic war do not have foundations in America. So it's so simple. There are approximately 29 million prisoners of the ethnic war over the age of 18 living in the United States of America. And I'm not saying that we need all 29 individuals over the age of 18 to sign that plebiscite vote, to sign that petition. But I think 1 million of us that remove consent and declare ourselves to be prisoners of war and demand that the United Nations International Court of Human Rights hear our case, and demand that the United States, the Roman Catholic Church, and her European allies, as well as those that were part of the United Arab States, pay reparations. Those are the individuals that were responsible for enslaving people and denying their right to self-determination. So family, it is our time. These things are not coming about because, it's something brand new. It is something that has been stated over and over and over again. But I think now with this generation of individuals of like-minded thinking can garner enough support to actually make a difference and actually move us forward to gaining reparations, not just monetary, but being repaired, restored to the way we were prior to the invaders or the captives coming in and committing ethnocide. And with that, family, I want to say thank you for tuning in. It's a blessing to bring these things to you. I pray that you found this information worthy to be shared. Please hit the thumbs up on this video. And until next time, I love you all with the love of Yahuwah. Shalom.